There were a lot of points on the board in week 8 in NFL, a lot of big performances and some breakouts. But which of those players can you actually get on the waiver wire and who should you chase? Let's talk top waiver priorities and also who can you move on from in the cut list. But first, let's talk injuries. There were a few big ones, starting with, unfortunately, Jordan Love again. Saw he was kind of gimpy throughout that game. He got hit hard, looked like there was something wrong with his ankle, was limping around a little bit, came back in the game, and then left because of a groin injury, is what they're calling it. And here's the problem that Coach LaFleur is saying there is a high level of concern. It sounds like Love is going to miss next week, and then after that, they have a bye, so why wouldn't they just sit him? And hey, they actually won with Malik Willis earlier, so it's probably going to be Malik Willis again for Green Bay. And that's fine for the team. That's fine for the running game. Not so great for the wide receivers, but I wouldn't say that they're all completely unplayable just yet. And also, young quarterback Drake May left early with a concussion. That means back to Jacoby Brissett. That's right. Talk about wide receivers possibly becoming unplayable. I think let's just steer clear of this offense, at least the passing game for now. Then this is a rough one. Stephon Diggs, the Texans, left with a knee injury. Did not look good. It was a non-contact play when he was making a cut. This team was just on the verge of getting Nico Collins back possibly in week 10, and now they might be without him and Diggs next week. So, yeah, Tank Dell already was on the climb. What's interesting is that we saw John Mechie. That's right, John Mechie actually get a couple of targets. Seems like maybe he's going to get more involved as opposed to a guy like Xavier Hutchinson, who never really caught on. Although I don't think either of them are really worth adding on the waiver wire, even if Diggs is out. But if you thought things were rough for Houston and that wide receiver group, let's talk about Jacksonville. So first of all, Christian Kirk is done. Out for the season now officially with a fractured collarbone. Brian Thomas Jr. also hurt with a chest injury, although it doesn't seem like that's too serious. And Gabe Davis somehow also suffered a shoulder injury. Well, Kirk is gone, obviously droppable, and BTJ is going to have to continue to assume that number one role. If he is out, I don't know. I guess the next man up is Parker Washington, but are we really going to go there? And then, should have known, Sterling Shepard in a prime opportunity to produce with Tampa Bay. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin out, and guess what Sterling Shepard did? He got hurt with a hamstring injury. Yeah, I think we're done with that. You picked up Jalen McMillan, stash him instead. Before I get to the waiver wire pickups for week 9, let me remind you that you have a couple of days left to take advantage of Boostober on Underdog. That's right, throughout the month of October, they've been giving away all these profit boost tokens, and you can also get a free pick, Russell Wilson on Monday Night Football. Just kidding, 1 yard. Take this freebie, and you can get this all by signing up on Underdog right now using code NGAME. Make sure you use that code when you check out, and you still get 50% deposit match all the way up to $1,000 worth of bonus cash. Now I'm going to start with some players that aren't going to be available in all fantasy leagues, but if they are, I think it's time to act fast. And let's start with Lad McConkey. Lad has been battling some injuries the last couple of weeks, questionable 2 weeks in a row. He was good to go, and he was good in this game. Finally, a breakout performance from the rookie, his first 100-yard game, and not only that, 2 touchdowns on his 6 receptions. Now, he wasn't even the leading target getter for the Chargers in this game, but it doesn't matter. He showed that breakaway ability, and he's shown dependable hands, catching all 6 of his targets. Now, the identity of this Chargers team has basically been control the clock, right? Run the ball, and then win with their defense, pass if needed. But we've seen that change a little bit, really out of necessity, because the last couple of weeks, J.K. Dobbins has worn down. His rushing average continues to plummet. And they don't have Gus Edwards there either. Kamani Vidal, I guess, is just not quite ready to be a main contributor. And they got Justin Herbert. Why not pass the ball more? They're finally starting to do it a little bit more. And Lad McConkey is the number one receiver in that offense. And this Chargers team may continue to throw the ball more. This coming week on the road against Cleveland, before the season, I would have said that's not a great spot in general, especially for a receiver, but it's turning out to be a pretty good spot. They're allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers as of right now. And with Jameis Winston there at quarterback now, I think it's just going to be a shootout pretty much every single week. There's also a new quarterback in Tennessee as of last week, but that's not why really we're going to have to be back in on Calvin Ridley. Yes, the Calvin Ridley who I'll just admit a week ago, if you watch to the very end, when I do the cut list, I said, you can move on from him if you need to. just keep in mind, this was after Ridley had another week of doing absolutely nothing despite hard target shares, but this was also before DeAndre Hopkins got traded. Now, DeAndre Hopkins was traded midweek, and sure, that clears up more targets, but what were the quality of those targets going to be? Well, apparently they got much better in week 8 because Mason Rudolph only targeted Calvin Ridley throughout the first quarter of that game. It was early, it was often, and Ridley actually caught them. All told, 10 receptions, 143 yards, and his 15 targets on the game were the most by any player in week 8. Look, I don't really still want to be in on necessarily Ridley or the Titans offense if possible, but you just cannot ignore that kind of target share. I mean, who else are they really going to? I guess Nick Westbrook-Akine is going to be sort of a red zone threat for some reason. Hey, he's catching touchdowns, why not? But it's still going to be Ridley. It's kind of a mess on offense, but still, Ridley is going to command targets for the rest of the season as long as he's out there. And I guess let's hope Mason Rudolph is still the quarterback because he's going to look his way frequently. I will have to say, they're not going to get the Lions every single week. And the Lions give up a ton of points to wide receivers. They're pretty much a pass funnel defense. So that did benefit also the fact that they were getting stomped and had to pass the ball from the very beginning. Look, it's not always going to play this way. The Titans won't always get into big scoring games. But again, a wide receiver, we know he's talented. We know he's going to get peppered with targets from here on out. I guess we have to kind of scoop him back up if he was dropped. Now, going back to that Tampa Bay offense, everyone wants to know who's the receiver who's going to benefit from both Evans and Godwin being out. And the answer is nobody. It's the tight end, Cade Otton, who for a second straight week, Otton was the most prolific receiver on this offense. 9 catches, 81 yards on 10 targets. Oh, and 2 touchdowns. I know it seems like every tight end was catching touchdowns this week because, as you heard probably 58 times throughout the day on Red Zone, it's National Tight Ends Day. Okay, fine. But this is now 2 straight games, again, with Evans out most of last week and all of this week with Godwin gone. Cade Otton has become the number 1 target for Baker Mayfield, and Baker Mayfield is continuing to throw the ball a lot. Right? This is not going to change. Otton has to be picked up wherever he's available. Look, even if you don't need a tight end, because now all of a sudden, all the tight ends are starting to produce. Guys who were doing nothing at the beginning of the year, Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce. Yeah, now all of a sudden they're all reliable again. You can still pick up Otton, use either him or your other tight end as some trade bait. You cannot ignore this type of target share, this touchdown upside. Anyway, he went for 100 yards last week, and we said, well, okay, well, that was against Baltimore. No, he did it again this week, again with the touchdowns. So if Otton is out there, I think you have to make a move for him. Now, what about quarterback? I usually wait a little bit later to talk about my favorite streamer or pickups here, but with Jordan Love out, it's going to be a little bit more important this week for some of you. So let's talk about your top pickup. It's Matt Stafford again. And he was dropping a lot of leagues because that offense was doing nothing. And now we see what it's like when they have 2 of the best receivers in the game back on the field. 279 yards, 4 touchdowns. Sure, the Vikings do give up a lot in terms of opposing quarterbacks and receivers, but still, this offense, when those guys are on the field, this is a top 10 offense, period. They were a top 10 offense last year, and now with everybody healthy, they're probably just going to continue this. And this week's matchup against Seattle, certainly not going to scare anybody because that Seattle team in general just seems to be on the decline, and that defense isn't stopping anybody. And then they get teams like the Dolphins and the Patriots. This is a good time to invest in that Rams offense. So let's start with Stafford at quarterback. If you need a pickup, he seems to be available a lot of places. Then I'll just say I know Jameis Winston is tempting, and sure, I would pick up Winston, except he doesn't have a good matchup at all this coming week, and then he's going to be on bye the following week. So let's make Stafford priority number 1 at QB. And if you want a piece of that Rams offense but don't need a quarterback, how about Demarcus Robinson? Yeah, the same Demarcus Robinson who did a lot of nothing when both Kupp and Nakua were out. But somehow, this is a good thing with them both being back because, yeah, not just that he scored 2 touchdowns on Thursday night. It could have been a fluky thing, right? And he only got 2 catches, right? Both his catches happen to be touchdowns. He only got 3 targets. I understand that. But this is the thing with D-Rob is he's more productive when those guys are playing. And the statistics actually prove that. Over last season and the first half of this season, as a Ram, Demarcus Robinson, in the games in which Cooper Kupp has also been on the field, he's been far more productive. For some reason, when Kupp is not playing, D-Rob is only getting 1.6 targets per game. And yet, with Kupp on there, almost 5 targets a game. I don't know. I can't explain it either, but Obviously, Robinson was not prioritized over the last few weeks, which is why we forgot about him and dropped him. But we saw it last year when he was playing toward the end of the season. He has that touchdown upside. And again, this is an offense that now I think I just want a part of. Look, maybe you don't want a part of the Carolina Panthers offense. But look, Xavier Legette is now the number one target there because Deontay Johnson is probably getting traded. I will say this, Legette didn't do a whole lot in week 8, but he did catch a touchdown. He's got some upside there. I'll say Bryce Young wasn't that bad. 24, 37, 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, sure, 2 interceptions. And yeah, I know that last touchdown was basically garbage time. I mean, most of this game was garbage time for them because they were losing from the jump. But still, I think he showed well enough that he could at least get another start, or at least he won't embarrass himself. Maybe Andy Dalton comes back next week, though. Again, I'm not even sure if that's a good thing anymore, but at least he's a capable quarterback. So I know it feels like we're trying to rationalize this here, but look, Legette's target share is going to jump up here. I think he's a guy who still has some flex appeal any given week and should just get better as the season goes on. And I'll just be honest here, there's not a lot to talk about running back on waivers. For some reason, running backs are not getting hurt this year. It's only wide receivers, so you probably don't need as much help at running back. You're looking for somebody who could be flex. You're looking for a smart stash. Let's go back to Tyler Allgeier. You already know he is the highest end of high-end handcuffs because if something happens to Bijan, Allgeier's going to get plenty of work. I will say this, out of all the backup running backs that you don't really want to start, you don't have necessarily standalone value, Allgeier in certain matchups does, and we've seen him get some big workloads even in games where Bijan was healthy. Of course, he did that a couple of weeks ago, had a 100-yard game. Look, this coming week, he gets the Cowboys, and the Cowboys are still one of the worst run defenses out there, so maybe we see Allgeier have a little bit of value. You shouldn't need to start Allgeier because there's only 2 teams on bye again, but this is a good guy to stash if he's out there. It does have at least the potential to be flexed if you're desperate at running back for whatever reason. If you have Bijan, you should already have Allgeier. And even if you don't, you can still stash somebody else's handcuff. I'm actually going to throw a second tight end in the mix too because I know Cade Otton is already picked up in a lot of competitive leagues. Let's go back again and circle to Mike Gesicki of the Bengals. The question with T. Higgins out is who was going to benefit? Was it going to be Andre Josevich? No, it was the tight end, Mike Gesicki. Eric All, the rookie, had been coming on and was eating into his snap shares, but now we've seen that trend reverse. Gesicki has become more of a pass-catching tight end once again, and he was the second leading target getter for the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 8. And he wound up catching 7 of his 8 targets for 73 yards, including some pretty impressive athletic plays. And this is what we were always looking for from Gesicki. The talent has always been there. He just couldn't quite put it all together. He can't stay on the field enough because he doesn't know how to block. But look, the Bengals don't care about that, right? They have all to block. They have other tight ends out there. Gesicki is a guy they're going to rely on to get those targets. If Higgins is out again next week, he's probably going to be your best bet as far as streaming tight ends. And finally, I didn't talk about Cedric Tillman at the very front of this video because I already talked about Cedric Tillman last week, advised that you pick him up. If you didn't pick up Tillman yet, you still have a chance, but you're going to now have to bid for him because he's coming off a very big game, 2 touchdowns, 99 yards. It's interesting to note that it actually wasn't Judy or Tillman. It was Elijah Moore who got the most receptions for the Browns in this game. And I really don't want to go there with Elijah Moore, at least not just yet. Look, Tillman, though, was right behind him with those 7 catches, 99 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's getting those deep shots. He's the big play threat here. Elijah Moore, a little bit more like dink and dunk kind of guy. I'll also mention again, like I talked about real briefly with Winston, is like the Browns next week do not have a great matchup against the Chargers defense. And then the week after that, they're going to have a bye. So I'm not going to go all out to get Tillman now if I didn't already get him before. Again, he's definitely worth picking up and stashing, but don't go crazy because you might be disappointed in the short term. Speaking of disappointments, let's get to the cut list. These are some players that if you do need room in order to pick up some of these waiver wire ads, you can say goodbye to players like Jackson, Smith, and Jigba. JSN, just say no. Hopefully you did say no to him in week 8. Because even in a good spot with DK Metcalf not seeing the field, he continued to disappoint. Now you look at it, you say, well, he got you double-digit points in a PPR league, 6 catches, 69 yards. That's not bad. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not exactly good either because where is the ceiling? He has had smash spots a few times here, not just because of DK being out, but just great matchups. Just the potential is there, and he's just not coming through. His separation score is very lackluster on the year, and then Geno Smith is looking like he's taking step backwards every single week. So I got concerned with this offense as a whole. I'm still starting DK. I really don't want to start Jason anymore. So if you need room for a receiver with more upside, I think you can just say goodbye here. And Seattle also going to be on bye in week 10. So if you're not planning to start him next week, which I hope you don't have to, then you're going to be without him next week after that anyways. Which leads me to a similar disappointing player, Dontavian Wicks. Week 10 bye. Next week, you're probably not going to want to start him because it's Malik Willis at quarterback. Again, Malik Willis, real life, hasn't been bad, helped the Packers early in the season, but this is not good for the passing game. Wicks, again, just one of several receivers in the mix here. Untrustworthy. Maybe he hits a long shot or gets a touchdown, but the ceiling is not high enough with everybody healthy. So you don't have to hold on to Wicks. And then running back, I'm going to say you don't need to hold Zach Moss either. Moss was clearly the lead back in that Bengals backfield early in the season, was getting double-digit carries every game, scored a couple touchdowns. But man, his workload keeps trending in the wrong direction as Chase Brown looks like he's the 1A in that backfield. Zach Moss, the last 3 weeks, 6 carries, 5 carries. That is not startable in any fantasy format, and the touchdowns haven't even been there either. This team is passing it more, and even when they run, it's not Moss in the lead. So he's not an absolute must drop because if Chase Brown gets hurt, then you're looking at Moss getting a much bigger workload. But still, as of right now, he just doesn't have fantasy value. And yes, I mentioned 2 tight ends you could pick up. A lot of tight ends are back to being must starts. So one tight end you don't need to consider anymore, you don't want to stream this week is Hunter Henry. I already told you Drake May is possibly going to be out next week. That means Jacoby Brissett gonna probably go back to that anemic offense we saw earlier in the season. Look, Henry wasn't a complete trap this week. Felt like it was going to be a trap play after the week before when he had a big game because Demario Douglas was out. 5 catches, 45 yards. It's okay. But next week, I don't really want to risk it. And this is also going to be a really tough matchup against the Tennessee Titans, who are very tough against tight ends. We're going to continue to cover everything you need to know to help win in fantasy. Check out all the advice we have for you for the week 9 playlist right here.